Hello, everyone. Today we're bringing you a non-spoiler review of Lord of the Rings: War of the Rohirrim, the feature-length anime interpretation of a major figure in the line of the Kings of Rohan, Helm Hammerhand. This film was made with the participation of Philippa Boyens, and as well as Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh in executive producer roles. So they have a hand in this, but Philippa Boyens, in terms of the people who are involved in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, she's the one who was the most influential to this.
She
Other than that, yeah,
she
go ahead.
co-writes this one.
Yeah, she's a co-writer on it. So other than that, though, it's very much a new team, highly influenced by Japanese anime. So jumping right into it, let's go ahead and we'll provide you with just a basic storyline. Again, no spoilers. Helm Hammerhand, who turns out to be the last in the first line of Rohan's kings, he and his people are beset by a major conflict that forces him to retreat into the Hornburg, which is later renamed Helm's Deep. This story deals with one of Tolkien's favorite themes, which is the decline of a great line, a great empire, but also the reasons for that decline having to do with character flaws and pride and pridefulness. It feels very much like a Shakespearean tragedy. But the reworking has really occurred in the central figure of the film, Hera Hammerhand, the daughter of Helm. She is the protagonist of this film, and that is a profound reworking because her character is a virtual non-entity in the appendices and where she's mentioned elsewhere. She doesn't even have a name. So the name Hera was given to her by Philippa Boyens and the other writers. They take her out of the virtual anonymity that she exists in the source material and give her a central role as the protagonist of this film. But I thought that this was a story that was worth telling. Any issues I have with the story have to do with the fact that the focal point for me and with for everybody else, for the most part, is always going to be the major storyline of the Lord of the Rings. And to the extent that this isn't that story, right? You're kind of like always wondering what's the relationship between this and and that, man? What's going on there, right? That's so the film does do some little hints here and there to gesture towards that future narrative.
I think the meat should have been like the story being told at hand, but it just felt like a
Mm-hmm.
dud to me because the whole siege at Helm's Deep, you never got that sense of a huge battle unfolding. Like the battle scenes that just were not at any scale uh, to really kind of appreciate, that conflict, like and or just as an on the level of being
Yeah.
entertaining, on the level
Well,
of
this
being entertaining, it just wasn't happening. So
Well, and this is one of the real challenges of these iterations from the original source material, right? I mean, with Tolkien, you've got a wealth of material, you've got a wealth of references and mythology. But I mean, this film, for instance, you talk about the battle, it's hobbled by the fact that we've already seen The Lord of the Rings, we've seen The Hobbit and the three film extravaganza that they made that into. When you compare this conflict to the War of the Ring and Helm's Deep, which is really just only one battle, right? It's going to pale in comparison. So it's kind of like we're already aware of the World War III that will occur in the era of the War of the Ring, right? And so
yeah,
this just feels incredibly small by comparison, and of course it is much smaller.
yeah.
There has to be the focal point of the interest has to be human drama and human interest. And speaking from my own point of view, even though I like this film better than you do, I'm way more interested. I mean, this is probably the bro in me. I'm way more interested in the elves, the dwarves, the orcs, the dark lords, the wizards. Way more interested in every character other than the humans. The humans don't interest me as much as the other characters, with exceptions. I love Aragorn. I love the mythology of the Númenóreans and Beren and Luthien and all that. Um, but for the most part, the human characters don't interest me as much, and the hobbits too. I'm more interested in the hobbits. Like a story about something that happens in the Shire, right? The wolves crossing the ford or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because I think
the,
they don't make the human characters that complex, particularly here. I mean,
mm.
yeah, there's, I guess, some nuance and layers to them, but you know which characters are gonna go bad and stay bad, and you know which characters are good and going to stay good.
Well, and again, it's really kind of unfair though, because we know that about. I mean, we know that about the other characters in the Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, it's not hard to separate the good and the bad characters in
Yeah.
Tolkien's
Oh yeah.
mythology.
Yeah.
I think there is a level of nuance to these characters, but nevertheless, the good and the bad are pretty clearly separated. Good and evil are clearly separated in Tolkien's world,
Yeah.
Tolkien's mythos. And I think that the Hera character was interesting for me because I think one of the traps they could have fallen into is just to make it a contemporary girl power narrative. But the character felt very true to the fictional period. The fictional historical reality that she's in. In that way, she felt very similar to Eowyn. Yes, she's strong. Yes, she's fierce. She wants to be on the front lines of battle. She doesn't want to be relegated to a traditional female role. Her focus is really very much on her people and what she can do for her father, for her, to safeguard the realm, the kingdom. And that felt very true to Tolkien's vision of the virtuous characters, right? It felt very true to the vision of the male and female characters. Is that what makes them good characters is that they're selfless. They're not focused on self. And Eowyn's story, I should say, Hera's story feels very true to that spirit, right? It's not about her until at a certain point it is, right? It has to be about her. She's forced into this position of having to be this great heroine. Um, but it's not like she's actively trying to be a character like, let's say, for instance, Merida in the Pixar movie Brave, where it's just like, I don't want any of this. I don't want any of this. I don't care. I don't care about marriage. I don't care about this. I just want to live my life. Hera is not that character. And it wouldn't ring true if she were that character.
Yeah.
Other than Hera, I love her character design too. I love the fiery red hair, and I think that the character designs in general kind of put me in mind of the Record of Lodoss War. So it's interesting. One of the things I thought was fun about the film is that on the level of visual style, it felt like a blending of two major fantasy traditions in my viewership, right? On the one hand, we have Lord of the Rings and that mythology, but then we have the style, which invokes anime, invokes fantasy anime like Record of Lodoss War. And for those of you who don't know Record of Lodoss War, I recommend you go ahead and check out the original series, and then even the new TV series they did a little while after it. Great fantasy anime. Um, I know. I thought that it was a very rich experience because of that blending of traditions. But other than Hera, I thought that Brian Cox was absolutely amazing as Helm.
Oh yeah.
That brings that Shakespearean gravitas. I think
Another great character design.
Helm looks amazing and sounds amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and he's an interesting character for me because he's sort of a demigod character. He's not really, you know, it, we're somewhere between history and myth in this film, right? The same way we are in Lord of the Rings, obviously. And it's like, am I seeing a kind of interpretation of history or am I seeing mythology? Well, I'm seeing both.
Yeah.
So Helm is amazing. Brian Cox is amazing. I
Yeah.
think Gaia Wise does great as Hera. I just thought that the film with the conflict and the despair, and then there's themes of grief and there's themes of pride and arrogance. It feels very much like a story in the vein of the stories that Tolkien is telling in the trilogy and in the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
So I thought it kind of honored the spirit of the source material in a way that felt true for me.
Despite my criticisms of Harris' character, I did like some of the little details and subtleties they did with making her this heroine figure, but her transition into that when she fully takes on that hero role, it's not a quick transition, and even when it happens, it's not like she becomes this like badass comic book
Mm,
female warrior. She still has a great deal of vulnerability, and they
mm,
also uh, respect, the physicality of her character
mm,
compared to, some of her opponents. If she has a bigger opponent, they honor that different physicality, and
mm,
she's often overpowered and has to find ways
mm,
to work around her limitations and her vulnerabilities, when she faces a greater foe. And the same way as Eowyn did with the King of Angmar, the Witch Lord of Angmar, in at the end of Lord of the Rings. And so I did really like that detail, and I was like, oh, I like that they're just not totally making her and turning her into this badass. And with Wolf, he's not a Dark Lord Soren figure. He's not Saruman. He's intended as a humanly complex villain. For me, he just came off as flat and one-dimensional, not that interesting.
Well, I think that the wolf character is problematic for that reason. I will agree with you. It's like we have one little moment where we kind of learn about his previous relationship with Hera and their dynamic. And, I mean, I'm glad the film doesn't belabor it too much because then I think we would get into the realm of padding. We know enough to know what he's motivated by. Um, but on the other hand, he does become such a destructive, kind of morosely villainous character that you do find yourself wondering where this great darkness is coming from. Um, I kind of go back and forth on it because I mean I think when one of the things that Tolkien's constantly telling us about evil, whether it's human or non-human, is that there's a seed of darkness in people. There's a seed of darkness in all of us. And there are these seminal moments where that seed is planted, and then we have a choice to make. We have choices to make along the way, whether or not we're going to tend that seed or uh, try to pull it as a weed, right? So I think Wolf is interesting for that reason. I mean, he invokes a lot of different Tolkien characters, going all the way back to the original Dark Lord, Melkor, one of the Valar, but also Sauron, right? This falling in love with one's own frailties and one's own lusts. And wanting to tend those lusts and see them realized in the world. But yeah, it doesn't quite come off. And I don't think Wolf is an interesting enough character to sustain that.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like one of the things that I was conscious of, is that can we stop spending so much time with this guy, right? I mean, it's like I don't give a crap about Wolf, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't. I just want him to die. Can he just die, please? You know?
Yeah.
And it's like that, on the one hand, you should have that reaction to a villain, but also if it's a really good villain, if the story is really popping, you're not feeling that way, right?
Sure.
You are, but that's not the only thing you're feeling, right? You're feeling other things, and that's pretty much all I was thinking. I don't care about this guy. He's just a rank drab villain.
Yeah.
There's nothing really interesting or mysterious about him. I know exactly where he's coming from. He's just plain silly, stupid, drab human evil.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to what you said about the anime style, and
Mm,
you mentioned Record of Lodoss War, which I have
mm,
such nostalgia for. And I think when we watched that, that really did a good job of integrating the anime style with the Tolkien spirit. It
mm.
felt like a Tolkien story, Middle-earth
Yeah.
story, told through an anime lens. Uh, This movie didn't integrate those two styles for me. Again,
Mm,
I had an
mm,
issue with the style. I think, for one, it does this combination of 3D
mm-hmm.
motion capture with 2D animation. When I was watching it, I was constantly distracted by the stylistic choices with the animation because you
Mm,
have these 2D animation figures against like a almost live action 3D
mm.
background. And
Yeah.
they just looked like superimposed on it, like detached,
Mm-hmm.
just not integrated into those environments.
Mm,
And so the most glaring obvious like problem I had with that was like with the horses when they were galloping, they just looked like they were galloping on a treadmill. Uh,
yeah, no, I noticed that too. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
Look, a lot of the animation looks kind of like surprisingly choppy. Um, which I mean, considering the scale and the fact that, the glamour of the IP, you'd think that maybe they would have more to work with. And I mean, but maybe obviously I think that's the best they could probably do. But
yeah, because I like with Lotus War, like I have no problem of bringing in an anime style, but
mm,
here it just felt a little more generic rather than giving this movie a unique stamp because I
mm,
thought it was trying to keep within the continuity of sure Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, but more to the point, Peter Jackson's live
mm,
action movies and trying
mm,
to replicate. his live action movies in animation. So those backgrounds, I mean, they brought in Alan Lee and John Halligan as concept artists
Hmm.
for this movie. And it's great to see Edoras, Helm's Deep, Isengard realized in animation, the designs and concepts still look great, yet it was
Mm.
just jarring for me stylistically, like an uncanny valley effect at times.
Mm. Mm.
They were trying to bring like a live action component to the experience here.
I agree. Some of the scenes too had a kind of pan and scan effect, and that's what I found most distracting. It almost like seemed like, we were in a computer algorithm where the thing was like, you know, scanning to like run through a program and then like,
Oh yeah,
So yeah.
well, too, some of the background characters, if you looked at some of them, they were like programmed to do certain movements, and so
Mm.
like like during one of the battle sequences, I noticed there's a one of the Rohirrim, or I think it was a dun landing with a spear, about to hit an opponent, and then dispatches them, and then there's no one there in front of him, and he still does the same movement.
Mm.
You know,
I wonder if we're being a little overly picky because those are the sorts
maybe,
of
yeah,
those are the sorts of things you would have seen in 2D animation back in the day, where you pretty
yeah.
much got characters in the background who were just doing one simple thing,
Yeah, this is
over and over,
nitpicking. You're right. This is nitpicking,
Uh,
and the film wasn't isn't as it's not definitely not unwatchable, and
mm,
I'm not saying it's a terrible movie, um, but I think again, uh, I felt that they were trying to replicate the original Peter Jackson trilogy, and even with Hera's story arc, it felt like a retread of the dramatic beats of Eowyn's story arc. It felt like it was using nostalgia again as a crutch to make you think of
mm.
the Peter Jackson movies rather than be its own thing. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think that's an enduring problem with any IP. You've got the original source material, and then you've got the iterations, and the iterations, in some sense, are going to have a really hard time standing out from the original. And the relationship between the original and the iterations is always going to be how to navigate that, what to do with that. I mean, we don't want to forget it entirely because it's part of the canon, it's part of the mythology. But on the other hand, we also want this to stand out. We don't just want it to be an empty nostalgia experiment. It's difficult. I mean, I honor that it's not easy to do what they were trying to do. And like I said, I mean, it's obvious. I think I like the film a great deal better than you do.
so how many stars out of five would you give this?
Out of five, I'd give it a solid 3.5.
Okay.
Because of the problems you point to, which I agree with, but I think the other parts are strong enough to earn a 3.5 star rating.
All
What
right.
about you?
Maybe two and a half. And
Mm,
I
mm,
say that just because I wasn't invested in the characters.
mm,
The story didn't come off for me. I would have raised it maybe a star if the
mm,
animation really worked for me, but
mm, mm.
the stylistic choices with animation just didn't feel integrated. I said were the problems I addressed with the 2D and 3D blending. So I am giving it a lower grade here because of that. But that said, is this how do you feel having seen this about, upcoming Lord of the Rings projects from Warner Brothers and Peter Jackson as producer? We got The Hunt for Golem coming out. I think there's another one in the works.
Yeah, no, I don't care. Um, I will say this. I was really edified by the anime. I think that animation is an ideal venue to tell these stories, and I would definitely be here for more animated experimentations and animated iterations of Tolkien's mythos. I think it works better.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I think the live action stuff has been done.
yeah,
They did Lord of the Rings, they did The Hobbit. That's it, guys. That's it.
yeah. I agree
I'm
with you.
sorry.
I agree with you. And we've gotten at least one really great Tolkien
Mm,
animation adaptation with The Hobbit. You know,
yeah.
so,
So if they do more cartoons, more animated stuff, I'm here for it. Otherwise, I'm not.
yeah.
Um, anyway, y'all, thank you very much. It's worth seeing. The worst ways to spend a Friday night. But this has been Tenian's Corner with our After Hours Screen Talk. I'm Dan. This is Tenian. And keep checking in, and we'll bring more material your way.
Yeah. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll look forward
Yes.
to bringing you some more content and reviews very soon here.